Well, I really appreciate you guys. We did not prepare slides because we're just going to tell you a story and talk a little bit about how CX impacts the two of us in the legal industry. But before we start with introductions, I just wanted to say thank you to the CXps folks, because everything that I'm about to talk about came from my origins of attending the first conference. I think it was 2016 that I came. And because of that, my individual network and my understanding of what client experience is grew exponentially. And I became connected with a lot of people in this room, a lot of people in this community, and I'm really grateful to be here. So with that, Camille, would you like to introduce yourself?
So, Camille Stell, and I work in the legal profession. And I have always worked in the legal profession in some capacity: paralegal, recruiter, marketing and professional development. And in the last, I'd say 5 to 7 years, really began to narrow my focus on what I thought was sort of the challenge of the day, which was succession planning for small business owners, which is, in our world, it's typically solo owners of law firms, solo lawyers who are owners of law firms, up to law firms that are about 25 lawyers, or kind of in the group that we provide service to. And we see a lot of businesses in that 7 to 10 kind of principal or partner size. So trying to help them find a home.
And I wanted to speak with Camille today because she does the very practical application and planning of helping firm founders in professional services work their way through a succession plan and all of the various steps that go into that, from the financial side, through the documentation, through the client conversations, which we're going to talk a little bit about. My background is a little different. So I've been in the legal industry about a little over a dozen years now, and I have also held many roles. But recently launched my own company, First Call Fractional, so I could provide fractional COO services to small law firms. And in that space, we have very complementary roles. I work with people on their ongoing day-to-day issues, and Camille helps them really think a lot farther out. And, you know, if we're lucky, we team up to do some strategic planning and help people think further than where they are just right now. But our topic is really built on thinking ahead about the succession plan because I had a bad experience. So I think Karen mentioned learning a lot earlier, and I was pleased to see that in Glenn's slides, he talked a little bit on the start succession planning and thinking ahead. So when I was at a firm several years ago, I was very excited to get the firm into strategic planning and get them thinking a little bit about the client experience and bring what I had learned from CXps into the law firm. I brought in Wicker Park Group, represented here today, and they trained me and our managing partner to go out and really launch a client listening program. So there was a survey involved, but we also did client service interviews. Really pleasant experience from my perspective, getting to understand first from the training what we were looking for, right? Establishing KPIs before we went out, identifying key clients, talking internally at the firm first about who these clients are, what they mean to us, who all is working on the client, what they know about the client that maybe they haven't even shared with each other, right? You got 10 lawyers working on a client, you got a biller and a paralegal and a legal assistant. You get everybody in the same room, you realize, oh, you know, not only have we been not taking them to the marketing events they'd really like and not sharing internal information, but they've got some crises going on internally, or they have some things going on that aren't legal in nature, but we really should have been talking about as a group. And then we prepared our questionnaires to go out, me and again, a managing partner. We had one client in particular that we learned a lot from. So, you know, my background prior to this, I had been the marketing director, business development coach for the attorneys. But getting into this part was really where I was excited to actually hear from the clients directly. So I'm gung-ho. I'm a couple of interviews in at this point, and we've identified this one key client worth millions of dollars a year to the law firm. And we go out and we sit down and we start our questionnaire. I've got a binder in front of me. literally, that we've highlighted questions that we're going to ask, and I'm taking copious notes. And as we get into the conversation, this one client across from us looks at me and the managing partner, and he says, well, we know our attorney's retiring. And I was like, that's great. We're going to get to that because we've done some succession planning, right? We've made a plan. And he says, so we've started to move our work. The room got very, very quiet because in that moment, I realized, and the managing partner beside me realized, that we had done the succession plan internally without listening to what our client would have wanted. And it turned out, we learned from that conversation that they didn't want another lawyer in the same practice group to be their successor for the business that they gave us every year. They wanted someone who thought like the primary attorney on their matters, the attorney who brought them into the firm. And it was a glaring example of how we were doing all of the right things, right? We had approached the process correctly. We had gotten a coach. We had become informed. We had talked internally. We had set our KPIs. We had scheduled our interview. We had picked the right people to talk to and listen to, but our timing was bad. And we were asking the questions after the fact when the process had already naturally begun. And we really missed the mark. Luckily, because of the conversation, the firm was able to recover. But in that moment, I personally learned a whole lot about client experience. You know, I was working from a place of theory. I had started to build this department, a lot of tips that Danny shared, you know, really feeling like we were truly building CX, but that practical application in one specific vein, right? CX in succession planning, we missed a crucial point, and that was identifying when that transition was going to start taking place, who we needed to hear from before the firm started planning. So that's the reason we picked this topic today and what we'll talk about at our table in a little bit. And Camille, if you'd like to elaborate, since you spend more time with this.
Yeah, so I thought I would talk about what succession planning looks like. And I actually see the same thing that I imagine many of you see, and certainly the experience that Brandy had sitting across from a client, which is that we may say, or an organization may say internally, oh yeah, I need to, think about client continuity and client care. But really there are a lot of other emotional factors that get in the way of just solely thinking about client continuity and client care, right? Such as, legacy, ownership. This one I'm sure is probably just legal. I bet none of you have ever heard that next generation, they just don't want to work hard. So I can't find a successor, right? There's no one out there who could take my place or step into my shoes. And so there's a lot to overcome. There are also obstacles like some of the cultural biases against aging. Against retirement, the idea that, when we're not using our brains every day in a job, that they'll just turn to mush. And so there are a lot of challenges and obstacles that small business owners, large companies all face when dealing with this topic. I usually look at solutions as really falling into to this group. One would be a wind down. There's no one else who can do what I do. I've run my business. I've enjoyed my time, and I'm just going to close it down or wind down my business. And, I usually see that in older professionals who have really let their business slow down with them over time. And so they're really looking at a short retirement date, and they're just going to wind down the business. next opportunity for owners is to have an internal succession plan. And, that is often a great seeming solution. But what sometimes happens is owners have been so opaque with their plans. They've kept everything close to vest about when they might think about retiring, or, what the client relations look like. You do the work, I'll manage the relationship. That the folks who work for you, who would have been entrepreneurial enough to step into an ownership role, have self-selected outside of your business. And now they're running their own business, or they're serving as a successor for someone else who decided to actually step away and really give an opportunity to someone. And then a third option is to find an external buyer for your business. And then the fourth option is to find a soft landing that perhaps looks like a merger, or in law, we might call it an of counsel role, where you step into another law firm with a much less active role. In another profession, it might be stepping into a more of a mentoring role or a rainmaking role, and maybe not as much actual client production role. So those are sort of the paths that I see, Brandy. And then, within those paths, different steps to take, different plans to create, kind of depending on where you are, your organization size. 3 quick things I look for are when you're going to make a transition, you first of all need to figure out how to transition your clients. So that's a big part of the conversation, and it needs to happen much earlier, like Brandy said. Transitioning your outside management responsibilities. So if you serve on the Economic Development Council, and that provides you with a lot of work or a lot of great referrals, I see many senior business owners who say, oh, I'm going to hang on to that. I love that role. That'll be meaningful to me, in my, as I'm winding down work, I'll still keep that prestigious role. But you may be walking away with, 10 or 12% of, potential revenue for the firm that you got from that organization. So, you really need to think about transitioning your leadership in that kind of a role.
And the value that the organization gets from
Yes.
being an active lawyer,
That's
right? So
that's right.
it's an extension of the client experience. They may not be clients yet, but they, find value in your participation because you're active.
That's right.
And it's got to be part of the succession plan.
That's right. And then the third item of transition is that internal management responsibilities. Very often your senior leadership is still the highest revenue producer. They're still the biggest rainmaker. They're still the person who's most known in the community. They are the brand of the business. And so getting that transitioned is important as well.
And I think if they are the person setting the standard for client experience, it's all the more important that any succession plan incorporate their vision and how they approach the client's feedback. And it kind of goes to what Danny said. If it's a large enough organization, all the teams have to understand the role that one individual, that one very crucial individual played in the client experience before they plan their descent into retirement.
So we will be at the middle table if anyone wants to have a further conversation. Thank you.
Thank you both.